All right, welcome back. So in this video, we're now gonna go over the much broader picture of what it means to be the negative mind and the positive mind. Actually, in the last video, we talked a little bit about where the negative mind's properties come from. So in a nutshell, we talked about what state the conscious mind is actually in and how it obtains its negative mind properties. So now we're going to talk about where the positive mind gets its properties from, and then we're going to really go over the broader picture, which, as you can see, it's not exactly the way I set it up before, but that was a more simple way of doing it, and it made things a little bit easier to understand. So if the conscious mind obtains its negative mind properties still from the subconscious just being commanded by the physical body, and it obtains it through compulsion, right? A very highly specific compulsion that comes from your subconscious, which compels the conscious mind to use rationality and logic. Then where does the positive mind, where does the subconscious get the properties that we've been ascribing to the positive mind, right? Which has to do with timing, quantization based on frequency, intention, and energy. Well, that actually, interesting enough, comes from the conscious mind, or the negative mind. So just go over this first point. The subconscious gets its positive mind properties from the conscious mind, and transcendental mental abilities can be used when the subconscious is discharged primarily by the mind instead of the body. And then just to go over this point, it says both the conscious and subconscious minds are involved in creating the negative mind state and the positive mind state. So what does that mean? In a nutshell, so this is the bigger picture, right? Well, let me go over this first point. When you use transcendental mental abilities, right, that actually occurs when your conscious mind, not your body, right, it occurs when your conscious mind is charging your subconscious. Because the subconscious, like I said, it's commanded by the conscious mind or negative mind, and it's also commanded by the body. So when the body is mostly, let me just read this. Yeah, I'm basically going over some of that point. But anyway, when the body charges the subconscious in a way that causes it to compel the conscious mind in a very specific way, right? And that's, like I said before, where it gets its negative mind properties. But even though the conscious mind is compelling even though the subconscious is compelling the conscious mind, and that gives it its negative mind properties and its ability to be rational, it's still also responding to the conscious mind. So it's responding to the command from the body to compel the conscious mind to have negative mind properties, and it's at the same time it's still responding from the negative mind to have other properties that go beyond what the body's commanding it to do. So that's very important, because when the negative mind sends a command to the subconscious, now it's what it can do is much broader. It's practically, it can practically do anything, because the conscious mind or the negative mind has free will. There's a million things the body's not going to be telling it to do, because the body's not programmed to command it to do that, right? The body will only command it to do very specific things and a very limited number of things, right? The conscious mind can command it to do anything it feels like. So when the conscious mind starts telling the subconscious to do something, and the subconscious starts to charge according to that intention, then it starts to do things that basically extend beyond the body's command, what the body's commanding it to do, the scope of what the body will command it to do. And so that looks very different, even though this is still the subconscious just doing what it normally does, just charging in response to some command. But when it charges in response to commands from the negative mind, it looks very different than how it responds in response to commands from the body. And when it's responding to commands from the negative mind, that's when it starts to have the abilities we've been calling transcendental. In other words, and then the second point, basically I was saying that the negative mind has normal abilities and the subconscious has positive mind abilities. So it makes it sound like if I do a normal ability, I'm only using my conscious or negative mind, not the subconscious mind. And if I use a transcendental mental ability, like emotion, I'm only using my positive mind and not my conscious mind. That's not true, right? So that's an easy way to look at it in the beginning. It's like a training wheel system. But actually, the subconscious and the subconscious are both involved any negative and positive mind states. So they're not mutually exclusive, right? So when you're using normal abilities, that actually also involves your subconscious, right, in the conscious mind. And when you're using transcendental mental abilities, that also involves your conscious and subconscious minds. So they're both working together for both mind states. So that's the more complete picture. I know it's a little bit complicated, but this will make a lot more sense later for pretty much everything we discussed throughout the book, having this more complete picture. Just to go over this point here, I think I finally said it. The conscious mind has negative mind properties when the subconscious is mostly charged by the body. The subconscious has positive mind properties when it's mostly charged by the conscious mind. Both minds function in unison for both states. Yeah, so I pretty much said that. So why do I say mostly? Because the subconscious is always being commanded by the conscious mind and the body at the same time, right? So it's never going to be one or the other. It's always both. Your body's always giving commands to your subconscious, and the conscious mind is always giving commands to your subconscious too. But the body is mostly giving a good chunk of commands most of the time that keeps your subconscious functioning in a very specific way. So in other words, your subconscious, in a sense, it could charge in a way that's more reflective of the body's commands and only a little bit reflective of the conscious mind's commands, or it could charge in a way where it's mostly reflecting the conscious mind and negative mind's commands and only a little bit reflecting the body's commands. So it's very different. So even though it's always being commanded by both the negative mind and the body, it can have it's almost like a net charge, right? So it can lean in one way more than the other. And when it leans more toward the body, that's when that's when the subconscious will compel the conscious mind in the way that it gives it its negative mind state. So it can use the negative mind or normal mental abilities. But when the subconscious charges, mostly based on the negative mind or the conscious mind, it charges in a way that gives it its will give the conscious mind its transcendental abilities. So that's when I can laugh, for example. I can have a natural laugh. So technically, I'm still using my conscious mind. My subconscious is compelling my conscious mind in a way that allows me to control my body in a smooth way to laugh, right? I'll be able to use emotions, right? That mostly still comes from the subconscious mind primarily, right? But the conscious mind will experience it when I'm creating things or using creativity, which is still an expression of transcendental control for the most part. That'll be the subconscious mind compelling the conscious mind, and it compels it to think in a certain way as well, and it affects what it believes and what it finds rational, and so all types of things. So the subconscious is still compelling the conscious mind to do a lot of the things that we've been referring to transcendental mental abilities, right? But it will only do it in the way that we've been calling transcendental, right? If the subconscious is mostly charged by the negative mind or the conscious mind, right? So that's very important. Like, that was kind of a mouthful, but I don't know what it's like to learn these ideas for the first time, because it's been years since I learned them, and I didn't learn it anywhere near this order that I'm teaching it to you. This is just the best order I figured to teach it. But hopefully this is coming across a little bit clearer. But yeah, this might make it a little easier, these next points. So when the subconscious is mostly charged by the body, it's in what I call the ground state. And when it's mostly charged by the mind, it's in what I call an excited state. So that's going to be very important for everything we discuss pretty much in the rest of the book. So the reason I call it ground state and excited states is basically because it makes me think of an atom, right? So an atom, in science, an atom has what's called the ground state. So the ground state is when, how should I explain this? Basically, a ground state has different energy levels, right? It has a number. Well, let's take an atom. It has a certain number of electrons, right? And this is for people who don't know science. If you know science, and this is all, you're very comfortable with this understanding. But in science, an atom has different energy levels. Every electron in the atom's orbit only one can exist at a specific energy level. So two can't be in a single energy level. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's called the Pauli exclusion principle. So, if there's one, and each energy level is generally divided up into sections called orbitals, right? So, I think the first orbital is the Is it the s orbital or the p orbital? I think it's the s orbital. I think it can only have two. The p orbital can only have six. I might be wrong. But it's been a while, so I study that stuff. But they have orbitals, right? So every energy shell or energy level has a certain number of orbitals. The first orbital, I think, has two. Once you have one orbital in one section, once you have one electron in one section of that, I think it's the s orbital, which only has two, then you can't have another electron in that one section of that s orbital. It has to be that's it, right? You can only have one other electron in the other section, then you have to move on to the next orbital. So every electron has a single place. Every energy level of an electron, every energy level in an atom has certain pockets. And only one electron can be in that pocket, then the next electron has to be the next one, the next electron has to be the next one. They're like rooms, almost in a sense. And two electrons can't be in the same room at all. So the ground state of an electron is when all the rooms there's no electron that isn't in those first initial set of rooms that an atom has. And but what can happen is an electron can jump from one of those rooms to a higher energy level. Each energy level has a certain set of rooms, so it can jump in a room in a much higher energy level. And there's obviously no electron already there. When that happens, I don't know if I'm explaining it that well, but when it happens, the atom is said to be in an excited state because it has more energy than its ground level. In science, the ground level is always what's considered to be the ground level is always the most stable, right? And in science, stability basically means that it requires the least amount of effort, right, to keep some physical object in that state, right? That's where it's always most stable. So in the ground state is where an atom is most stable. It's easy to get there. No matter how much energy it loses, it's always going to at least have enough to stay in the ground state, right? So when it gets excited or when it gains more energy, and that could be through light or electromagnetic energy, one of the electrons may jump to one of the higher levels. You can only get to those higher levels if you have enough energy to do it. And so when those electrons get a lot of energy, they may go to a higher level, and then the atom is said to be an excited state, but that's not very stable. So it's hard to keep the atom in an excited state because something's going to be changing where it wants to avoid. It doesn't tend to stay in that state. It's going to have a hard time staying in that state. And so in the case of an atom, it loses energy. We see it as light generally. So when when that electron emits energy in the form of light, the electron will fall back into its lower orbit, its lower orbital. And then when that happens, the atom is no longer excited. Now it's back in its ground state. So the most stable state. It doesn't have to worry. It's not going to have a hard time staying in that state now. So I know that was kind of a tangent. But the reason I say that is because that really is how your subconscious mind works, right? Your subconscious has what I call the ground state, which is the most stable state and the easiest state to stay in, right? It's not hard. It takes virtually no effort to stay there. But it also has an excited state where your subconscious goes to excited state. It's hard to keep it there. And it's going to constantly trying to go back to its ground state. But during that time it's in its excited state, now it could do some interesting things, right? It can do the things that we've been calling transcendental, right? So the ground state is the subconscious state that's charged by the body. So this is a command that comes from your body that's different from primal emotions. Primal emotions influence the subconscious in a way that's an instantaneous burst of energy, right? That's how the body commands the subconscious when you're getting primal emotions, right? It charges it very quickly, and it's meant to basically, like I said before, it's meant to help you and make some decision that ensures your survival. This kind of command from the subconscious is very different. It's not an instantaneous burst. This is a command your body is giving your subconscious pretty much the entire day. So it's not an instantaneous, momentary, temporary thing. It's constant through the whole day, basically while you're awake. This only changes the moment you go to sleep. That's why your experience of reality is different, because your subconscious is compelling you different from the way it compels you during the day. So during the day, your subconscious is sending commands to your body's sending commands to your subconscious that keeps it in its ground state. And in its ground state, it compels your conscious mind in a very fixed and limited way. Limited depending on how you look at it, but it's a very fixed way, right? And that's the experience of the compulsion from the ground state is exactly what we've been calling the negative mind. So your normal awareness during the day, your normal ability to think logically and rationally, and use normal abilities like moving your arm, using normal levels of logic and intelligence, imagination. These are all actually abilities that come from your subconscious when it's responding to commands from your ground state, right? When it's responding to commands from your body. So in that case, your subconscious is in its ground state. So it may not seem like it, but me moving my arm like this, when I imagine simple things like 2 + 2, or I express that the sky is blue, all of that is also a function of my compulsion, right? My subconscious is compelling me to be able to move my arm this way. It's so seamless it doesn't feel like it, but it is. And you're going to see it when you start controlling your subconscious, right? But yeah, all of this and the simple normal abilities that I use, all of that is still occurring through subconscious compulsion. But it's occurring through subconscious compulsion while my subconscious is in the ground state. So it's very quick, very seamless, and it feels effortless. But the reason for that is because the body is commanding the subconscious in a very in a very well-controlled way. You can kind of say it that way, right? So it means that the conscious mind barely has to do any work. The brain is really, I don't know if I said, the brain is really the one that's doing all the commanding of your subconscious. I just say the body, but it's really the brain, which is in the body, of course. But so the brain is actually sending commands to your subconscious. It's doing most of the work, commanding your subconscious to compel you to use all these abilities that you just think are natural to the conscious mind, which they actually aren't, right? And we're going to talk in the next chapter. Is it the next one? The next one, the one after. When people have disabilities, right, it's actually when the body isn't sending those, something's wrong with the body or something's changed in the body where it's not sending the proper commands to the subconscious in the ground state. And so they don't have they won't have generally the normal abilities as most of the population. But we're going to talk about that a little later. But even though the subconscious is being commanded all day, all the time, at a very constant level by the body, my conscious mind can still send a command to my subconscious too. And my subconscious will also charge in response to that command. So if I keep charging my subconscious, I'm using my conscious mind, then it's going to leave the ground state. So that's basically analogous to the atom going into its excited state, which is what I mean here. When it's mostly charged by the mind instead of the body, then it goes into excited state. Now, what makes the excited state of the subconscious so special is exactly what I said before. In that state, it's majorly or mostly reflecting commands from the conscious mind. And the conscious mind has free will. It could tell it to do anything, right? The body's never going to tell it to do anything except the limited number of things that it's programmed to tell it to do. But the conscious mind has much more freedom than that. So when you're mostly controlling the subconscious, or it's mostly charged by the conscious mind's commands, then it kind of leaves this ground state because in a sense its configuration changes and the primary charge it has changes from this ground state. And then now it's going to start reflecting, it's going to start doing things that seem almost magical compared to this state because it's much less limited. And that's exactly what transcendental mental abilities are, right? So if I want to charge my subconscious to be more creative, if I want to charge it to have a certain kind of belief or have more confidence or feel certain emotions, right? My body is only going to charge it only cares enough to charge a few different emotions, and it doesn't care about the rest. They're not important to my body, right? My body's not going to charge the emotion of humor, right? Which I think it can do, right? Sometimes when people take drugs, they're altering their brain in a way that gets their body to charge certain emotions. But that's very damaging. We'll talk more about drugs later because that's important. But suffice it to say, the body doesn't care about most things. A lot of things the conscious mind would be interested in. It's not going to charge the subconscious to make you more funny. It's not going to charge it for you to have certain kind of fantasies that you think are very fun and amazing to have. It's not going to charge certain beliefs because they're not important to the body. The body thinks completely differently with the intelligence it has. It pretty much, like I said, only cares about survival of the species. All that other stuff is not important to the body. That's why it doesn't charge those things. The conscious mind, however, can, because those things are important to the conscious mind. So I could charge my subconscious to make me better at making music, right? I could charge it to make me better at making poetry. I could charge it to make me better at understanding math, right? I could charge it to help me get in the zone and make a good conversation. You know what I mean? And so when it's charged by the mind, it could do way more things than when it's charged by the body. And that's when it's an excited state. And like I said, that corresponds to your transcendental mental abilities. Now again, so both the conscious mind and both the conscious mind and the subconscious are both involved in your negative mind, when your conscious mind has negative mind properties, and when your Oh yeah. So anyway, like I was saying, I was thinking about something. So yeah, both of your minds are actually involved in when you use normal mental abilities and when you use transcendental mental abilities. So it's not exactly correct to try to split it into assigning one to the conscious mind and one to the subconscious. Both minds accomplish both things. So going forward, what I'm going to do to still have the negative mind, positive mind dynamic, although you can kind of see we're kind of growing out of it, but still to have it, because it's very important to still have that dynamic for chapter 9 and 10. When I say negative mind going forward in this new paradigm, negative mind just refers to, I'm going to refer to the conscious mind, but when it's being charged by the subconscious at the ground state, right? Because that's when it has this that's when the conscious mind has the negative mind properties that we've been talking about. It doesn't really have those properties when you're dreaming, for example. But when you're dreaming, your body isn't charging your subconscious at the ground state. You're pretty much only charging your subconscious at the ground state when you're awake. So when I use the term negative mind, I'm referring to conscious mind when the subconscious is in the ground state. And when I say positive mind, I'm referring to the subconscious when it's in excited state, right? So when your subconscious is in the ground state, it doesn't really have the properties we've been describing to the positive mind. Technically, it still does, but the majority of commands are not coming from the conscious mind; they're coming from the body. So the conscious mind is still using the subconscious in the way, according to the properties it normally has, but it's not going to seem like it because the body's doing all the commanding, and then body makes it so that the conscious mind can use mental abilities in a very seamless way. But they're very limited though. That's the drawback to it. So you don't have to do any work to charge this frequency or charge that ability, right? But the downside is that now the scope of what your subconscious will help you do is very fixed and very limited. We'll talk more about that next chapter too. So yeah, we pretty much already went over that. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. So again, I know that I'm assuming, right? Because I've known these ideas for years, so I'm like super comfortable with them. But it might have been a little complex if you're learning this for the first time. But yeah, once you get used to this, because a lot of what we talk about later is going to be in this dynamic. You're going to be able to understand it in terms of the ground in excited states. It's going to make way more sense, right? So we're going to talk more in the next chapter, in the next video about this dynamic too, to understand certain things about the world. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I would say if it's difficult, probably watch it. I could go through a recap, but I feel like I've already explained it enough. But yeah, I would say just rewatch it if it's kind of tough to make sense of, or even just watch the next video, because in the next video we're going to talk a little more about this, and it might give you a better sense of how it works. All right, so yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.